the doctors had never seen this in a little girl before.
Alyssa was having her period at 3 years old.
Bigger than quarters.
She was just skin and bones. I remember saying, our mother is dying.
Next, two medical mysteries that defy the experts. When Russ and Dawn Hazel find out their little girl is growing too fast, they're forced to face a terrifying reality.
I'm thinking, how does this happen? I wasn't ready to lose Alyssa.
I was petrified.
Then, Kathy McFadden's seemingly ordinary life turns into a living nightmare when no doctor can explain the terrifying series of symptoms which plague her for more than 10 years.
I knew something very serious was happening. My greatest fear was that I could die.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery.
In January 1993, Russ and Dawn Hazel had just settled down in Ontario, Canada, and were focused on one thing: raising their 2-year-old daughter, Kristen.
Family life was wonderful. We spent lots of time together.
Dawn was a stay-at-home mom, and so she was at home with Kristen, and I went to work full-time. I am a police officer with the Town of LaSalle Municipal Police Service, so it was a little hectic at times.
Russ was the most involved father I have ever seen.
We had plans to have 2 kids, maybe 2-3 years apart.
That winter, the Hazels begin trying to conceive, and in February, they're delighted to find out that Dawn is expecting.
I got the phone call from Dawn. She told me that she was pregnant. We were ecstatic.
We couldn't be happier. I had a normal pregnancy. There was no complications. Everything was normal.
Dawn goes into labor on September 29, 1993. 5 hours later, the Hazels meet their new daughter, Alyssa Marie.
It's a miracle. You see this little bundle of joy come out. She had lots of red hair.
She was absolutely beautiful. She weighed 8 pounds, 10.5 ounces.
In fact, everything about the baby seems perfect, except for one unusual feature.
She had a birthmark, a very faint mark on her right arm. You can barely see it.
We didn't think too much of it.
Within 3 days, they're back home and quickly adapt to life as a family of 4.
Alyssa was a great baby, much like Kristen.
It was actually quite easy with the second child because Kristen kind of took to her, and Kristen was a great big sister, and she liked to play with Alyssa, and she kept Alyssa entertained a lot of the time. She was sleeping through the night probably within 6 to 8 months. She ate well, she was happy all the time, and we were having a great time with her.
Alyssa met all the milestone markers for a child her age.
Then, one sunny June morning, when Alyssa is 20 months old, Dawn makes a shocking discovery.
I went to change her diaper, and there was blood in the diaper. I was petrified. I didn't know what to make of it. I thought something had happened to her. I called Russ into the room.
I had no idea what was going on. Only thing I was thinking about is there's blood coming out of her. We're gonna get her to the doctors.
We took her to the local emergency room. They just basically looked her over, and they looked at her private areas.
The doctors told Dawn and I she's bleeding vaginally. I was very shocked. I said, what do you mean she's bleeding vaginally? Like, how's that happen? Why is that happening?
And of course, they were concerned as to why a child that young was bleeding where she was bleeding. They were asking us if we had left her alone with anybody, or if, anybody we knew had touched her or done something inappropriate with her.
I got to a point where I said, I can assure you, I've done nothing to this little girl, and my wife has assured you she's done nothing to this little girl. and we got to find out what's going on here. After a while, they did believe me, and they said, we need to do some tests. We need to see inside her. We're going to need to do an ultrasound now.
A pelvic ultrasound is a test that they use to look inside your abdomen and see if there's any abnormalities. The ultrasound showed that Alyssa had a mass on her right ovary. On a child that size, her ovary should have been the size of a pea. The mass that was encasing her ovary was the size of a walnut.
The doctor said, she's bleeding, and it's associated to the ovary, and we don't know what this is.
The doctors thought that she had cancer.
If Alyssa has cancer, I thought that was a death sentence, and I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to lose Alyssa.
They said that the best thing for Alyssa would be to go in and surgically remove the mass.
And they said, we're going to do the surgery, we're going to test it. If it is cancer, there's a good chance that your daughter may have to go through chemo and radiation and the whole 9 yards. We were just shocked, scared. I've never had surgery. Here's my baby, she's 20 months old, she has to have surgery?
We told Alyssa that she was going in to have the surgery. That was the hardest decision that Russ and I had to make, was to allow them to basically cut open our little girl.
The next morning, Alyssa is wheeled into the OR.
The door's open. She goes in, and Don and I are left there as the doors close.
I thought I might never see her again.
Minutes seemed like hours. It just seemed like an extraordinarily long time. Surgery was 2 to 3 hours. I didn't leave that door much at all. I'd pace. I just stayed there until the doctor came out. He told us that he got it all, but he could not salvage the ovary.
After the surgery, the doctor sent the ovary and the mass away to be biopsied.
And they said, we'll let you know the results in a month's time. So we went home with Alyssa. We were really upset that our baby could have cancer. The uncertainty played on our mind.
What if it was life-threatening?
Finally, an agonizing month later, the findings are in.
The mass wasn't malignant. It was a follicular cyst.
A follicular cyst is a large, fluid-filled sac in the ovary. Instead of releasing its egg, the sac keeps growing.
And he said, well, this is extremely unusual, extremely rare, Mr. Hazel. I can't tell you why it happened.
And they said that it would probably never happen again.
It was like a big weight taken off our shoulders.
We enjoyed ourselves. We watched Alyssa grow and heal.
Over the next year, Alyssa thrives, developing new skills every day. But then, one afternoon in the summer of 1996, the unimaginable happens.
We had taken Kristen for swimming lessons at the public pool. It was around lunchtime.
I had taken Alyssa into the bathroom, and we noticed that there was blood on the toilet paper, and there was like a smear of blood in her underwear. And I panicked.
My heart just sank.
I was terrified. I couldn't believe that it was happening again.
In the spring of 1996, 50-year-old Kathy McFadden was on top of the world. She and her husband Bernard were thoroughly enjoying life in their hometown of Wilmington, Delaware.
Bernard and I, we were married 26 years. We did a lot of different things together. We lived very close to a park and took a lot of walks.
Kathy was just the most vivacious, fun-loving, wonderful mother of our children.
With their 2 daughters grown and out of the house, Kathy is able to focus on her students.
I was a guidance counselor. I really did enjoy my job.
My mom liked working with families and seeing a change, seeing the difference in the kid.
But her greatest passion is biking.
We would try to bike every weekend.
We would do 30, 40, 50, 60 miles a day. It was something that we really enjoyed, really relished.
But that fall, after finishing her usual route, Kathy notices an unusual pain in her leg.
My ankles were really swollen. You couldn't tell I really had ankles. It just looked like one big leg. That evening, when I went to bed, they were still swollen. I really disregarded it. I thought, by tomorrow morning, it should be fine.
And when Kathy wakes up, her ankles are back to normal, and she and Bernard set off on their bikes. But just 20 minutes into the ride, the pain and swelling return.
My legs were aching. The pain reminded me of a toothache that isn't like a sharp pain. It's more of a dull pain. So I tried to keep pedaling through it.
I was very concerned because she had never had anything like that before.
So I knew that there was more than just a little problem. I didn't understand this at all. I realized it was time to go to the doctor. I went to my primary care physician, and she had referred me to a vascular surgeon. He felt my ankles, he felt my legs, and he said that probably that this was due to venous insufficiency.
Venous insufficiency is a common condition in which blood collects due to faulty valves in the veins and then leaks out into the tissue of the affected area.
The swelling was due to the blood pooling around my ankles, and that's what was causing the ache in my legs.
The doctor recommends that Kathy wear compression stockings to help promote the blood flow in her legs, but it only helps up to a point.
When I had to spend a lot of time on my feet, my legs would just ache when I got home. It just got really frustrating when they still hurt.
The doctors told her that this was just a natural part of aging. We had plenty of friends our own age that weren't having these kinds of problems as a natural part of aging.
There weren't any other doctors recommended for me to see. And even though I didn't feel like it was adequate, I didn't know where else to turn.
Resigned to her fate, Kathy does the best she can to simply deal with the constant pain and swelling over the next 3 years. But then, when she least expects it, a strange new symptom begins to emerge in the fall of 2001.
One morning after a shower, I noticed I had a rash on my leg. There was an intense itching. I thought maybe it was some sort of an allergic reaction.
But it's not long before the bizarre rash takes on a life of its own.
I would get these blisters, bigger than quarters, all over the tops of my feet. And the blisters behind my knees was the worst because it really incapacitated me. Whenever I would bend my leg, then that would crack and pus would ooze out.
Her legs would seep. Her legs would get very, very swollen. She would be in such pain and discomfort that she could just barely walk. I was shocked by how quickly she was falling apart.
I realized that I was sicker than I thought I was. What was wrong with my body?
12 months ago, 2-year-old Alyssa Hazel underwent surgery to remove an ovary and the cyst that was growing on it. And when doctors give her a clean bill of health, the Hazels are hopeful the worst is over. But now, a year later, Alyssa is bleeding again, and her parents are terrified that she'll lose her remaining ovary, or even worse, has cancer.
We took Alyssa to the emergency room and said, "Docs, here we are." Start telling them what had happened a year prior.
And they ordered specialized tests.
and the ultrasound revealed that there was another cyst on the left side.
The doctors just decided that they wanted to send us to a specialist to see if they could save the ovary.
The medical team immediately transfers Alyssa to London Health Sciences Center 2 hours away, where endocrinologist Dr. Mo Jenner takes over the case.
Alyssa was a frightened little girl, having been in hospital before and then coming into a strange hospital with strange people around. I did an external examination of the chest and the abdomen and the pelvis.
Dr. Jenner's examination reveals nothing out of the ordinary, but he's struck by Alyssa's height. She's much taller than most girls her age.
Dr. Jenner ordered a bone age to be done on Alyssa. They x-ray your left hand, and there's a chart that you can compare these bones with, and it'll tell you pretty close to your exact age just by looking at the bones.
Her bone maturity was compatible more with a 5-year-old rather than a 3-year-old.
Playing a hunch, Dr. Jenner orders several blood tests, including one for estrogen.
Her estrogen levels, female hormone levels in the blood, were elevated.
My reaction when the doctor told us that Alyssa's problems could be hormonal was, what do you mean?
Dr. Jenner then told us that she probably had precocious puberty.
I said, you mean she's having, like, puberty, like a teenager? And he said, yeah, exactly.
Precocious puberty in girls is a condition in which excess estrogen causes the appearance of secondary sex characteristics and menstruation before the age of 8. Its causes vary and are often unknown.
Alyssa was having her period at 3 years old.
We were shocked.
As a result of her estrogen levels, Alyssa is also experiencing what amounts to an adolescent growth spurt, 10 years too soon.
The worst case scenario would be that Alyssa would grow very fast in her early years, so she would end up being extremely tall at a young age. Then her bones would come to a point where they think that they're at the age where they should stop growing, and her growth plates would fuse. And so she could be 4 feet tall, 5 feet tall at age 8 years old, and that would be as much as she grew.
Without any treatment, she would progress. With the secondary sex characteristics, which include breast development and pubic hair development, at the age of 3 or 4.
I'm thinking, how does this happen? There's no reason, no explanation. Where can we get some answers? And then how can we fix her?
To ward off early puberty, Dr. Jenner immediately starts Alyssa on a medication to keep her estrogen levels in check.
The hormone blocker should reduce the number of follicles on the ovary and cause some reduction in size so that the surgical option would not be necessary.
1 month later, Alyssa was scheduled for follow-up ultrasounds, and they showed that the cysts were diminishing. We were overjoyed that she was back to her normal self.
And by the time Halloween rolls around, the Hazels are beginning to feel confident that Alyssa's medical issues are under control.
That day, the kids were getting ready to carve their pumpkins.
Alyssa opened the door, and she just tripped and fell down. She had a little bump just on her, like on her shin, in the tibia area.
We figured she'll be fine. But over the next week, the bump on Alyssa's leg didn't really go away.
She complained that her leg was sore. So we decided we'll take her in and get it x-rayed. The doctor ordered an x-ray, and then he came to us and said, you know, she's got a fracture in her tibia here. And he said her bones are very unusual.
Her bones are not solid. They're very fibrous. When you see them on an x-ray, it's described as ground glass. They're not nice, solid on the inside. They're very fluffy and fuzzy.
He told us the casing of the bone should be like 4 or 5 millimeters thick. He said, but Alyssa's, he said it's like a sheet of paper. It's very thin. The doctors had never seen this in a little girl before, and they were concerned and didn't really know what was going on.
I was terrified.
Over the past 3 years, Kathy McFadden has been suffering from crippling pains in her legs. While her doctors are certain it's a result of poor circulation, she isn't so sure, especially when a frightening rash begins to spread down both legs.
I would wake up, bloody sheets, oozy sheets, sticky sheets. Legs were a mess. It was horrible. So I made an appointment with a dermatologist. He looked at my legs and he told me I had stasis dermatitis.
Stasis dermatitis is a blistering skin condition that develops in areas of the body with insufficient blood flow and fluid buildup.
I had medication for the stasis dermatitis. He prescribed a cream for the rash. It just didn't work. I still had to wear the compression stockings. That was really hard. Very often, my legs would bleed and ooze. The stocking then would become stuck to my skin. The dermatologist recommended a complete change of medication. And on my next visit, I hadn't improved.
Desperate for relief, Kathy tries one doctor after another, but to no avail. And along with her rash, the agonizing leg pains and swelling continue. She gradually finds herself increasingly debilitated.
I started to think to myself, what is going on? My legs were a mess. I was really feeling depressed. I was struggling to understand why I should have all these things going wrong.
It was difficult for her, especially since she wasn't getting any better.
Then, mysteriously, Kathy begins to drop a few pounds. At first, she's pleased, but not for long.
I started losing weight rather rapidly. It was small increments, but then it became pretty dramatic.
During about a 3-year period, Kathy gradually went from being a very robust 150, 155 pounds to maybe 120. And then she went to 115. And she went to 110. And she went to 105. To the point that eventually she, at her lowest point, weighed 95 pounds, and she was just a skeleton.
She looked white as a ghost. I mean, she was just skin and bones.
I just felt, all of a sudden, very weak. I was tired, too. That's when it became a concern. My primary care did some blood tests. The doctor said that the blood tests that she gave me indicated that I had diabetes. And I asked her what that meant. And she said it was my glucose level that determined that I had diabetes.
Your pancreas does not put out sufficient insulin so that your blood sugar level, your glucose, gets too high.
The McFaddens are also surprised to hear the doctor say that Kathy's dramatic weight loss is an effect of the disease.
I couldn't understand it. I didn't believe that I could have diabetes.
Unconvinced, Kathy consults another round of specialists, but the diagnosis remains the same. And gradually, as none of her symptoms improve despite Kathy's best efforts to manage them, the McFaddens begin to suspect that the doctors are missing something important.
It appeared to me and to Kathy that these symptoms must in some way be related.
They wouldn't make a connection between all the symptoms.
And over time, they begin taking an immense toll on her.
I felt overwhelmingly fatigued. And at that point, I was taking naps after school. And then also going to bed very early at night.
My mom would call out of work to go see a doctor 2-3 times a week.
she realized that she had to retire. And this was an extremely difficult decision for her.
On January 1st, 2007, Kathy goes to work for the last time. But it's not a retirement she can enjoy.
A lot of my days were spent on the sofa. Bernard took on a lot of extra responsibilities, like the laundry, cooking.
She really became much more reclusive. It was difficult for her to get up and walk more than a few steps.
I had gotten so thin and so bony that I had to carry a pillow with me when I sat down anywhere because it hurt. My bones were all that was left of me.
At this point, I remember my sister saying, you know, our mother is dying. But honestly, I felt like she'd already died. Because she just wasn't the person that she used to be anymore.
Dawn and Russ Hazel's daughter, Alyssa, has been diagnosed with a bizarre condition, precocious puberty. At 3 years old, she's already getting her period. And now, new tests have revealed that her bones are frighteningly thin. Baffled, the emergency room doctor refers the Hazels back to Alyssa's physician, Dr. Mo Jenner.
The parents were concerned with this new information.
We told him we had found out that the casing on the bones were really thin and they're unusual, they're different bones.
And you could almost see a light bulb go off in his head.
Dr. Jenner thinks he knows what's going on, but to confirm his hunch, he reaches out to a fellow specialist.
Dr. Jenner and I were colleagues at Children's Hospital in London, Ontario, in the Division of Pediatric Endocrinology.
Dr. Jenner came back and he said, "Does she have any birthmarks?"
And we kind of looked at each other and thought, well, yeah, she's always had a very faint mark on her right arm.
We're redheads. It's like the color of a freckle, but it's really unusual, but it's not very prominent.
There wasn't much else that it could be, and that was the syndrome that we know of as McCune-Albright syndrome.
McCune-Albright syndrome is an extremely rare genetic disorder. In healthy individuals, genes provide the body with all of the instructions they need to function properly. But in patients like Alyssa, for some unknown reason, a mutated gene triggers early puberty, painful bone deformations, and cafe au lait-colored skin spots.
The gene that's mutated in McCune-Albright syndrome is the GNAS1 gene, but the reason for the mutation is not known. This can have an effect on many systems in the body.
It was a great relief to finally find out that what she had a name.
In fact, the Hazels had seen the very first sign of the syndrome the day Alyssa was born, her birthmark.
The mutated gene can affect skin cells and cause the affected skin cells to appear darker, and this leads to the cafe au lait spots that we see.
Then, over time, the same mutated gene triggered an overproduction of estrogen, stimulating the growth of Alyssa's ovarian cysts, her period, and her growth spurt.
The cysts that Alyssa had in her ovaries related to the high activity of the cells in the ovary that are making estrogen. As these cells work harder and harder, they get larger and larger and form these cysts. These high estrogen levels led to an early growth spurt and early menstruation.
And it also caused Alyssa's bones to develop abnormally, leading to the fracture of her tibia.
Normal bone is going to be composed of harder, more dense bone around the outside, and inside the bone, there's more of a lattice work. It helps with how the bone handles stresses. In patients with McCune-Albright syndrome, this architecture is abnormal. And because of this, the bone becomes more prone to fracture.
And as the disease progresses, differences between the densities of bone can also result in severe impairments.
The worst-case scenario with patients with McCune-Albright syndrome is that the bones can be deformed. You'll see it in the bones of the skull.
When it develops in the skull, it's sometimes becomes thicker bone, so we run the risk of having difficulties with her eyesight. Her hearing could be affected. Her teeth could be affected too.
We were shocked with the diagnosis. Now, what does this mean? What do we have to look forward to?
While there's no cure for McCune-Albright syndrome, it can be treated. Alyssa should continue to take the hormone blockers to ward off puberty.
When the blocking agents are removed at the normal time of pubertal onset, which would be around 12 or 13, then she could progress and have the normal hormonal fluctuations.
And Russ and Dawn will have to be careful to keep Alyssa out of situations where her uneven bones can easily fracture.
He said there'll be no contact sports, there'll be no ice skating, no rollerblading. You know, anything that can be risky behavior where you're going to fall down, she's got a little trip and fall, she'll break.
Unfortunately, there's a possibility that Alyssa's bone malformations will eventually affect her appearance.
The facial deformities that occur with McCune-Albright cause asymmetry, in other words, an imbalance of features between the right and the left side, and some overgrowth of bone in the base of the skull and in the cheeks.
I was concerned that Alyssa would be different than other kids.
We didn't want her to experience pain. We don't want your kids to experience any pain.
I was so scared.
For more than a decade, 62-year-old Kathy McFadden has endured a bewildering constellation of symptoms. Swollen, painful legs, a blistering rash, diabetes, constant fatigue, and severe weight loss. Now, after wasting away to a frightening skeletal 95 pounds, she's set on making one last-ditch effort to find out what's turned her life upside down. Once again, she's checking in with her general practitioner.
I knew something very serious was going on, and it frightened me, and I didn't know what to do. My greatest fear was that I could die.
Having exhausted all other options, the doctor sends Kathy to a local hospital for a full-body CAT scan. And when the findings come in, she's completely taken aback. There's a mass the size of a baseball growing in her abdomen.
I was shocked. The technician who took the CAT scan thought they saw something on the tail of my pancreas.
The medical team isn't sure what the growth is, but the McFaddens fear the worst.
This was devastating, so I was very, very, very upset, to say the least.
Wasting no time, Bernard and Kathy make an appointment at Thomas Jefferson Hospital with Dr. Eugene Kennedy, a leading pancreatic surgeon.
When I met Kathy, I was surprised because she's actually a young and vibrant woman, and she appeared quite old and frail. I thought she was dying. The first thing that stuck out at us was the size of this large mass in the pancreas. It was 8 centimeters.
Dr. Kennedy said that with a blood test, we'd be able to make a confirmation of just what type of problem this is. We had to wait. It was at least 3 weeks, and I felt that the wait was interminable.
In mid-March, the findings are finally in.
Based on the results of the blood test and the CAT scan of her abdomen, we confirmed that Kathy had a glucagonoma.
A glucagonoma is an extremely rare tumor that grows on the pancreas. In a healthy individual, the pancreas secretes the hormone glucagon to help maintain blood sugar levels. But in patients like Kathy, for unknown reasons, the tumor constantly secretes glucagon regardless of blood sugar amounts, wreaking havoc on almost every system.
The function of glucagon is to raise your blood sugar when you haven't eaten, by releasing sugar that's stored in your liver and by breaking down muscle in your body to form sugar. When the pancreas starts to form a hormone-producing tumor, the tumor doesn't pay attention to any of the other signals in the body, so it just grows and makes its hormone without any regulation.
I was so relieved. We'd been searching for an answer for 15 years. I really was ecstatic.
With each passing year, the tumor set off each and every symptom Kathy experienced. The first signs, her aching legs and swollen ankles, were the result of her body turning the protein in her muscles into sugar.
The glucagon causing her to break down the proteins resulted in her lower extremity swelling and aches and pains. If the protein in your bloodstream gets low, you get excess fluid and swelling in your body.
And her low protein levels most likely triggered Kathy's next symptom, the horrific rash.
One theory is that the breakdown of protein due to the glucagon lowers the level of some of the essential proteins and amino acids that are needed in the body to keep a healthy skin intact.
And it was only a matter of time before Kathy's body began to react systemically to the glucagon, triggering her weight loss and diabetes.
The glucagon made her body think she was starving. So as a result, she started to break down her own body's muscle tissue to elevate her blood sugar so that her body continued to function. Kathy developed diabetes because the blood sugar was high, as if she wasn't making enough insulin. If left untreated, Kathy would have continued to get weaker and weaker, lost weight, and become more debilitated. And the more debilitated she became, the more opportunity for other problems, other infections, and other issues of chronic disease to set in. And any of those problems could have resulted in her death.
The harsh truth is undeniable. Kathy's life is on the line, and surgery is the only way to stop the disease.
There's no cut and dried way to say whether one of these hormone-producing tumors is a cancerous tumor that could eventually spread to the liver, or if it's a benign tumor that would have not spread anywhere. The worst-case scenario I prepared Kathy and her family for was finding spots of tumor that had spread. The treatment would be to examine her abdomen for any signs of tumor, remove anything we could find, and then follow her thereon.
Whatever you hear about pancreatic cancer, you always think terminal.
I think that this was the first time it truly occurred to me that whatever it was that she had could kill her.
So right before they put me under, I told Bernard, I love you, and I'm going to be okay.
The wait is excruciating. But 4 long hours later, Dr. Kennedy finally emerges from the OR.
The results of the surgery were great for Kathy. There was no evidence that the tumor had spread anywhere, so we were able to remove the tumor in its entirety.
We were just overjoyed.
From the time her tumor was removed, she started to get better. There was no additional treatment.
And less than a month after the surgery, Dr. Kennedy has more good news for Kathy.
Her diabetes had disappeared as well, so every single symptom that she had had was gone. 4 years before she was diagnosed, it was very, very disappointing and discouraging that they simply could come up with no leads whatsoever.
Bernard and I couldn't help wondering what took so long to find a diagnosis.
What's difficult is taking all of these seemingly unrelated symptoms and putting them into a single diagnosis. I've actually never seen someone with a glucagonoma before. They're quite rare tumors. There's several hundred cases reported in the medical literature. However, many of them don't have the severe symptoms that she did.
Over the past year, Russ and Dawn Hazel have watched their daughter endure a series of bizarre symptoms, from getting her period at age 3 to strange bone fractures. They've finally learned that Alyssa has McCune-Albright syndrome, an incurable genetic condition. Overwhelmed by it all, they can't help but wonder why doctors fail to recognize the disease.
McCune-Albright syndrome is a rare genetic syndrome, less frequent than 1 in 100,000 individuals. Aside from Alyssa, I've seen one other patient with McCune-Albright syndrome.
Now that we know what it is, you can move on and deal with things when they come. She was limited in her physical activities that we would allow her to do. We compromised in other ways, and we protected her as much as we could.
Today, Alyssa is 16 years old, She has experienced puberty like any teenager. And just like any adolescent, she does things that make her parents nervous.
I'm wearing a brace because I was on a roller coaster and I really hurt my neck.
She's a very determined little girl. She's learned to adapt herself to be able to do things that other kids can do. She's well adjusted and she's just happy.
I try to blend in as much as I can at school. It hasn't affected my life that much. I try to act as normal as I can.
While the disease has affected her appearance, Alyssa's case is relatively mild.
Alyssa is experiencing these facial deformities to a somewhat lesser degree than other children with this syndrome.
And the Hazels take heart that her condition hasn't dimmed Alyssa's spirit.
Alyssa is the most positive, upbeat, happy person you're gonna meet. She's always got a smile.
It's an honor to know Alyssa. She's taught me how to deal with things. When I look at her and I see the kind of kid that she's turned out to be, you're so proud. And I hope she gets whatever she wants out of life.
I don't let the disease hold me down. I just try to be positive and just accept it and just go on with life.
Today, Kathy is back to living the full, active life she once enjoyed.
I feel wonderful. I feel fabulous. Every day I feel stronger.
She has more energy now. It's just like a breath of fresh air. I'm just so happy to have my mom back.
I'm looking forward to spending a lot of time with my 2 grandchildren and being able to be with them and watch them grow.
It's just so wonderful to have Kathy back. We all refer to her as our miracle girl. I hope I can get her back on her bicycle one of these days.
It's something that I think will happen. I feel really better. I can do anything I want. It feels wonderful to be back.